Well, good morning, good evening, whenever you are watching this. It's really good to see you. I'm just going to straight up tell you we have a few people in the room, so we are not talking to just the camera. We have someone on this side, 3 people in the middle, holler, so 2 people over on the right. Yeah, so we're probably breaking all sorts of rules, but I'm going to look at them and then I'll look at you as well as I give announcements to you. As you're watching this, we want you to know a couple of things. It has been a crazy week and a half, and I know that you felt it. We have certainly felt it, where we were used to a normal rhythm of life and what we do together as a church, and then in one day, it felt like everything changed. And so we're punting a bit, and we're trying to figure this thing out, and so we just thank you in advance for being gracious to us during this season and helping us by rallying around us as a community as we just shift and figure out what we're doing. I want to tell you a couple of things that are newer. As a result of not being able to gather together, we are going to be doing messages every week. You'll be able to see those on Sundays, anytime that works for you. I know a lot of churches are hosting online live Facebook feeds and that sort of thing, and we just felt like so many of you guys, so many of our people have young children, and that'll be really hard for you to do. And copyright issues won't let us keep that on Facebook. After we have it up there, we have to pull it down. And so we want as many of you to have access to Jason's messages during the week whenever it works for you. So I hope that brings some sort of normal to you. If you have little kids or kids school-aged, we are doing online Zoom gatherings. We had our first one last Sunday, and it was so much fun. We started at 4 years old. I'm hoping in the coming weeks to add our 2 and 4-year-old class, do a story time as well. So watch your emails for that. We get together for about 45 minutes, and I teach a lesson, and they're engaged in it, and it was really fun. And so we're going to be doing that again this Sunday. If you're on our parent email list, you got the information about it. But if you're watching this and you're not on our list, we would love for you to be on that list and know what's going on. So you can find us at Brookview Kids on Facebook, or you can also email the church, and we will connect with you. And I'm going to tell you how you can get in touch with us in just a few minutes, so hang in there. The other thing that we're doing is we're gathering our life groups together. So if you have a life group, hopefully you got contacted by your leader, and you are figuring out a way to continue to meet together and just talk with each other and do life together as much as we can through the technology that we are so blessed to have during this season. We have something coming as well for those of you that don't have a group to be a part of. And so I'll hold off on telling you all about that in this moment, because I also want to tell you what we're doing in regards to community needs. That includes our Brookview family needs that might be arising because of everything that's going on, but as well as our local community and the partners that we've been working with over the years and how we're planning to help out with that. So essentially, we have a communication card that is online. If you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on Contact Us, at the very opening of that screen, you will see fill out our Sunday communication card. If you click on that, that will take you to a link, and it's basically gathering your information so that we can respond to you. And you'll see a lot of different things on that communication card. At the very bottom of the screen, we have our COVID-19 quarantine season response. And so we want you, if you are struggling and you need help in any way, you need someone to help you financially, food deliveries to you, you're struggling because you're sick and you're housebound, whatever that might be, we want to know about it. Will you communicate with us and let us know so that we can love you well? We don't know about everything because we're not gathering in person. The other thing that you can do is if you know about a Brookview person that's struggling, giving, you can nominate them and let us know on their behalf how we can help them. So hopefully you'll be able to go online and make use of that. We also at the bottom of that have a place where you can sign up if you want to be on a distribution list of people that are alerted when there are needs within our Brookview family community and then our community at large as well. We are continuing to partner with Vision House and the Nourishing Network to provide weekend meals for families. We had a food pop-up pantry that Casey went to this week for the Cedar Way Elementary School kids. That's continuing to go on once a month. They're also providing weekend meals to students still, and they are having some food shortage, obviously, issues there, and they've asked for our help and donations with that. And so we'd love to communicate with you those needs that are coming up. For Vision House, they're needing people that could run some errands right now because they're kind of staying inside of their facility and quarantining themselves, and they need access to someone to go get groceries or buy different supplies that they have. So that's what we know about this week. I'm imagining that will change and that will be developing, and we're in this for the long haul. And so if you want to be one of those people that is on that email list, we really want to hear from you by you filling out that communication card online. We also want to just point out that our church is run on the generosity and the faithful giving of everyone who comes here. And we often say, hey, if you're visiting, don't fill out anything, but probably, or don't put anything in the offering baskets when they go by. But probably if you're watching this, you're part of the Brookview family, and you might want to help out financially, and you might want to continue to give donations that you would have given if you had walked in the doors on a Sunday morning. And so we just want to direct you to our online giving as well. If you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on giving, there are all sorts of instructions for you there to walk you through whatever method of payment seems to work best for you. And so we just wanted to point that out as we're embracing a season that we have a lot of unknown for us and just as a community as well. And so we're with you in that, and we feel that with you as well. The other thing I forgot to tell you about our kids' church gatherings, if you have friends that you feel like their kids would love to be a part of something like this, that is open to anyone. We would just love to see all sorts of kids logged on to that. If you go to brookviewchurch.com and you click on our ministries, you'll see kids is part of it, children and family, and it has our schedule of how we're doing our Sunday mornings and contact information so you can reach out to me and I can give you the Zoom links that you need for your age-appropriate classroom as well. Okay, this is the very last thing. It's a novel here, but a speech, it's not a novel. A novel's a book. Okay, it's a long speech that I'm giving. So I had said, okay, life groups, if you're feeling like, hey, oh man, I was planning on joining one of those life groups in the spring because there's a spring quarter, and that's when the groups, the on-ramp for new people to come into groups, I want to let you know those still exist. We still want you in those groups. Even though they're online gatherings, we will figure out how to welcome you into that space. And there are other people that are newer to the groups as well, and so you won't feel alone in that. So if you would like to join an existing life group that meets during the week, that is on the communication card as an option that you can check the box for. And again, that's online at brookviewchurch.com. Now, if you're like, I'm not sure that I want to do a life group, but I want to do some sort of gathering, and I want a way to kind of watch the message and be able to respond to it. I'm really excited about this because Jason is going to be hosting an online gathering. You can do it in addition to your life group, so you can do more than one thing if you want to during the week. But on Thursday evenings from 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock p.m., Jason will be hosting a discussion. So you can open it up with all the things that you hated about his message and all the weird, just kidding. What that really is just to kind of take the ideas of the message that Jason gave online and just dive into it a little bit deeper and just kind of process it with a group of people. So we don't know how many people will show up to that. We're just super excited to see who might want to do that. To sign up for that, brookviewchurch.com, you go to contact and then click on the Sunday morning communication card. And as you scroll down, you'll see that that is a box that you can check as well. I did it. That's all the things that I can think of. Thank you. Yeah. I'll probably sit in the chair and go, oh, I forgot something. That's okay. I'm going to be back next week. I'll see you next week. What I'm going to do, though, is as Jason transitions up here, I'm just going to pray for us. God, I thank you for who you are. I just kind of had this phrase kind of rolling through my mind this week that even though all of this is surprising to me, it's not surprising to you. You know all things, and you're present in all things, and you long to walk with us in every season of our lives. And we often talk about, God, how good you are in the highs, and that we notice you, but then there are valleys, and we need you in those too. And, for some of us, this isn't a huge change. It's like, oh, I'm used to working from home or whatever, and it doesn't feel like that big a deal. For other people, there's a lot of change going on. And then you add fear and insecurity of the future and disappointment over all the things that we aren't going to be able to do that we were hoping to do, and it's just a lot. And so, God, would you meet us in those places today? Would you begin a new work in us? God, I believe that you long to grow a garden, that this season that we're in actually can be fertile soil if we surrender it to you. But we need your help. And so, God, would you be with us? Would you go in front of us? Would you go behind us? And would you be all around us? And may we fix our gaze on you. It's in your name I pray. Amen.
That was so well done. Really good job. My love. Nice. Well, guys, it's just a crazy time, and I can't ever remember anything like this. Jen and Casey and I have met with various groups of people from our church over the last week or so, and we have kind of asked the same two questions over and over. First, we've asked, what are the challenges that you're facing in this season? And the list is very long. There are a lot of challenges, and those get shared pretty readily. I mean, a lot of stuff is going on. But we've also asked people, what opportunities are presenting themselves to you in this season? And for a lot of people, there are unique opportunities that are popping up, and you're seeing those. But universally, I'm kind of hearing two different things. These also just seem to be emerging a lot. And first of all, with so many things being canceled or postponed or shut down, there is so much disappointment. Just this overwhelming disappointment. I mean, for many of us, we were really looking forward to some stuff that just isn't happening now. And some of it's postponed, but most of it's just flat out canceled. It's crazy to think, but a week ago, my oldest daughter, Kate, was in Boston. She plays Division III college basketball for George Fox University. Let's go. And they had made it all the way to the Sweet 16. So they were going to play last weekend with the opportunity to go to the Final Four. And instead, all college athletics was canceled, season over. And the seniors on her team were absolutely crushed. The whole team was, but especially the seniors. And there was some weeping. And this is kind of how life is going right now. So much stuff it's just canceled. And for many of you, it's just been a series of things. Like there's one thing after another that you were excited about, and it's just canceled. So there have been these waves of disappointment. But something else that is so common is just what we're hearing from people again and again is this overwhelming uncertainty. Normal life has been totally disrupted for many of us. And for many of us, there's absolutely no idea when things might get back to normal. And to be honest, some of us are wondering, depending on our circumstances and what it is we're going through, if things will ever get back to normal. I can't even remember a time, really, in my lifetime when everything felt so uncertain. And these are strange times, and we don't know how it's all going to turn out, and we don't really know when it might be over. But here's what I do know. I know that for those of us that follow Jesus, he is our rock. He's the firm place for us to put our feet. He's our foundation. And because of him, we are enabled to walk through uncertainty differently. And today what I want us to do is I want us to look at what Jesus taught about fear and what he taught about walking through seasons of uncertainty. He certainly didn't teach that if we follow him, we're going to be free from pain and disappointment and hard things. He didn't teach that God won't let bad things happen to good people. But here's how I would summarize much of his teaching. I think we could sum it up like this. While uncertainty is unavoidable, okay, fear is optional. And by the way, how do you like the screen in your screen? I hope you like it. Dave likes it. Dave likes it in the back, so we're good. Now, the interesting thing is Jesus taught on this. He taught on it again and again and again and again and again. And if we follow his progression of teaching on it, we see something that's, I think, both interesting and kind of comforting. And it's that initially, his closest followers didn't get it or believe it. It was something that really only came to make sense to them after a lot of time and after a lot of experience. And so today, what I want us to do is follow the journey of the disciples of Jesus. And I want us to walk with them through his teaching on fear. Because here's what I see. In times of uncertainty, for any of us, fear becomes a big issue. Uncertainty naturally leads to fear, and just like Jesus' original followers, we can be very skeptical of his actual teaching about fear. I mean, if Jesus says, well, uncertainty is unavoidable, fear actually is optional, we just can't really see how that can possibly be true. How could that possibly work? And so today, I want us to go on a journey with the disciples and see how they arrived at some conclusions about this. Now, the Gospel of Matthew really captures the progression of Jesus' teaching on this. And we're going to start in Matthew chapter 10. Jesus gets his followers together. He gathers the 12, and he says, look, we've been together for a while. We've been doing this thing for a while, but we're going to split up now into teams of 2. And I'm going to send you out to do a bunch of stuff, and I am sending you out like sheep among what? Wolves. Yes, sir. Like wolves. I'm sending you out, and eventually some of you will be arrested, some of you will be beaten, some of you will be devoured, and some of you are going to have to sacrifice a great deal for following me. But don't be afraid, he said. Don't be afraid. Fear not. And the disciples are hearing this, and I imagine they have to be like, what? Like, what? We're going to be arrested and beaten and like, we didn't sign up for that, Jesus. We're going to be arrested and beaten and abused and devoured, but you don't want us to be afraid. Like, are you serious? And Jesus was like, yeah, I'm serious. You don't have to be afraid. And then he went on to say this, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, I imagine like being one of the 12 and just like trying to get your mind around this. And it's got to be like, wait a minute. Like, are we supposed to be afraid or are we supposed to not be afraid? Because you seem to be saying both. And Jesus is like, see, here's the problem. You're afraid of the wrong things. There are things to be afraid of, but you are afraid of the wrong things. Don't be afraid of what can only hurt your body. And he goes on. And he's like, okay, so let me explain it with this. And he comes up with a little metaphor. He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And they're all like, oh yeah, Jesus, they're sold for a penny. I don't know, actually, but are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid, you are worth more than many sparrows. And again, they have to be like, okay, that was not all that helpful. Are you saying that you're going to keep bad things from happening to us? Because you just said, can we rewind it, Jesus? You just said that we're going to get arrested and beaten and maybe worse. And the sparrows, if you ever notice, Jesus, they still fall to the ground sometimes. Like they die, Jesus. So what are you saying? But what Jesus is wanting is for them to begin to connect the dots because they had just had an unforgettable experience prior to this. And that experience ties into what Jesus is teaching to them here about fear. Now, this is a very famous story. It's found in Matthew chapter 8, so 2 chapters earlier. And Jesus is teaching and he's healing and he's surrounded by a massive crowd. And the only way to escape the crowd was to go where the crowds can't go. And it says in Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 and 24, it says, then he, okay, Jesus, got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. Now, the Sea of Galilee is surrounded by all these hills. And so huge storms can roll in very suddenly, almost completely undetected. And that's what happens. Here they are on the lake, also known as the Sea of Galilee. And the waves from this storm are literally crashing over top of the boat. So let's pause, because I think many of you can relate to this. This season that you're in right now can feel to you a little bit like waves that just keep coming at you. It's just one thing after another thing after another thing, and you aren't sure what's next. Is this storm going to get worse? Is this storm going to tip you over? Because it feels like chaos and uncertainty. And in a sense, that's what these guys are feeling. These waves are huge, and they're just sweeping over the boat, one after another. And Matthew was there. He was in the boat, and he tells us all heck was breaking loose. And then he says, but Jesus was sleeping. Jesus, thank you, my wife, for the laughter on that. Jesus was sleeping. So the boat is, envision it. The boat is getting thrashed. The disciples are absolutely panicking. And by the way, most of the disciples prior to this, they're like fishermen. They are used to navigating through rough waters, especially on this particular body of water, and yet they are panicking. They've never seen anything like this. And they look over at Jesus, and he's asleep. How can that be? Now, here's why I think that's such a powerful image. Some of you have walked through in your life an overwhelming storm at some point. Because there's been a tragedy or an event in your life, and you prayed and you looked to Jesus, and he was asleep. Jesus did not respond the way that you thought Jesus should respond. God did not respond the way that you thought God should respond. And here's what's interesting. All the disciples, they felt all of those same feelings again and again and again in various circumstances as they tried to do life with Jesus. This just kept happening. Jesus did not respond the way that they thought he should. They felt confused, at times they felt abandoned, and they frequently felt afraid. And yet, they became the very ones who brought the message of Jesus to us. They became the ones that insisted on him being the Son of God, the ones that laid the foundation for all of humanity in what it is that followers of Jesus believe. They're the ones that insisted that he is the way, and he is the truth, and he is the life. But they were themselves no strangers to adversity. And in this particular scene, not only did they imagine God was asleep, they looked over and literally saw God asleep. And many of you know the story. The disciples went and woke him saying, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." And he replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Now, on the surface, that is a ridiculous question, is it not? I mean, envision it. They're standing there. They're all drenched. The boat is beaten to shreds. It's barely floating. Their clothes and the sail and everything's just all ripped. And Jesus looks at them and says, "Guys, why are you so afraid?" Imagine what the disciples are thinking. They're like, "Jesus, are you crazy? Do you not realize what just happened here? We almost drowned. That's why we are afraid." And in case you're not clued in, you know, like being the Son of God and everything, in case you're not clued in, here's how it works with like mortals. When life gets out of control, see, that elicits fear in us. And life was out of control, and so we were afraid. Did we get the screen working?
Yep, it had a technical difficulty.
Amen. Way to go. God is at work.
Don't be afraid.
Oh, man. So just if you're online, I was speaking, and all of a sudden there were heads turning and a lot of movement in the room, and no one was. It's kind of distracting, but we're back. We're back. Okay, so the disciples, it's as if Jesus was saying to them in this moment, "Guys, even with all of that going on, and I'm well aware of it, you didn't have to be afraid." And the disciples must have been going, "What do you mean we didn't have to be afraid? This is stupid. You don't understand. This is cause and effect. When life spins out of control, we get afraid." But Jesus is using this crisis masterfully as a teachable moment, a moment that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. And his point is simple. You didn't have to be afraid. And the implication is, and this is so powerful and so important, and if we could get this and somehow learn to experience this, it would set us free. The implication is, just because life spins out of control, it doesn't mean you have to be afraid. But this is unthinkable to the disciples, and it's unthinkable to us. And they have to be totally confused by this, because they're just like, "Hey, we thought that one always leads to the other. If life's out of control, there has to be fear. It's cause and effect. It's like being unsuspended in the air leads to falling. It's like pounding a Slurpee leads to a brain freeze. It's like being a Mariners fan leads to depression," right? Life out of control leads to fear. It's just how it works. It's just cause and effect. The one automatically leads to the other. We can't see it any other way. And yet, Jesus is saying, wrong. It doesn't have to be cause and effect. They don't have to go together. Now, as long as you think you have to be in control, you'll be afraid. But guys, I'm trying to show you when life spins out of control, you don't have to be afraid. Now, I want to pause for a second, because wouldn't it be amazing if somehow you and I could get there? Like life spins out of control, and yet somehow we're not afraid. Jesus is using this crisis in the boat to teach and to grow his guys. And I'll tell you what I think. I think that Jesus knew that his death was coming soon, that he wouldn't be physically present with them for much longer. And he was about to send his guys into a very dangerous world with the most important message that anybody would ever hear. And he knew that in the years to come, they would face many, many storms. And as long as their top priority in life was to stay in control of their lives, they would miss their mission. He knew that as long as they thought, as people often think, "Hey, if my life's out of control, it must be out of God's control. Hey, if I can't handle this, God can't handle this. Hey, since my life is spinning out of control, God must have stopped paying attention to me." He knew that as soon as they started telling the world about him and trying to live the kind of life he was inviting into them, them into, they'd face storm after storm after storm. They would be hunted down, they would be arrested, they would be beaten, they would be persecuted, they would be stripped of everything they own, and almost all of them would be killed for living that way. And he knew that if they evaluated God's faithfulness based on their own ability to control circumstances, they would inevitably abandon the faith. So all through this time with them, he's trying to teach them again and again and again. Look, you've got to learn to separate these two things. Life can spin out of control, and yet God can still be doing great work. Just because you're losing control doesn't mean God's losing control. So somewhere along the way, you're going to have to let go of trying to just manage and control your life all the time. You're going to have to decide to just be faithful and let God manage and control your life. And Jesus is trying to get them to understand, if you do that, God will move so powerfully through you. So before fixing the problem, while this storm is still raging, Jesus has this very confusing conversation with his guys. And he makes them wrestle through the truth of what he's saying while the storm is still raging, which is, I just think, is ironic. I mean, the waves are still crashing, the wind is still blowing, stuff on the boat is getting banged around, and it's probably so loud that they can barely hear each other. And a lot of the guys they're like, "What did he say, Pete? You know, he said we're supposed to not be afraid? What?" So he allows them to sit in this crisis for a long time before he acts. How insensitive of him. But eventually he acts. He shows them why they don't have to be afraid. And it says, "Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, 'What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him.'" In Mark's version of the same story, and by the way, he tells the same story, and he says, they were terrified. This is after he calmed the storm. They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." In other words, initially they were terrified of the storm and drowning. But after Jesus rebuked the storm, they take a look at Jesus and they're terrified of Jesus. Because they're like, "Who are you?" And it dawns on them suddenly in this moment, wow, Jesus is more powerful and terrifying than the storm. Now, that event had just recently happened when Jesus later taught what we were just looking at a minute ago. Don't be afraid of what can only kill the body. Be afraid of the one that can kill the soul. And so here they are now being sent out two by two, and they hear the words of Jesus, and they're starting to mull this over, and they're beginning to connect the dots. Okay, don't fear the one that can only hurt the body. Don't fear the person. Don't fear the storm. Don't fear the empire in their case. Don't fear the collapse of an economy. Don't fear a disease that's making its way through our culture. You don't have to fear the things that can only hurt your body. A few chapters later, this same subject comes up again in another drastic illustration for these guys. Jesus multiplies the fish and the loaves. Very famous story. He feeds the thousands upon thousands. And it says right after it was over, Matthew says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into a boat. Question, why did Jesus have to make the disciples get into the boat? Because they remember what happened the last time they got in a boat. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him on the other side. He's not even with them, while he dismissed the crowd. So this time, Jesus doesn't go with them. He sends them ahead. He goes and he dismisses the crowd while they head out on the lake. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land. And here's kind of a similar story, similar feel. Buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So the disciples are trying to row to the other side, but they're rowing into this massive headwind and all of these waves, and they're tired. And you have to imagine their hands are blistering and they're soaked. And so it says, shortly before dawn, okay, so they've been rowing and they've been fighting this storm all night long. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, as you would be. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. And once again, it's a crisis on the water, and once again, the disciples freak out. I don't blame them. I'm not mocking them. So, like Peter, if you're watching me from heaven, dude, I would have too. Okay, but Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And the disciples are going, whoa, wait a minute. You weren't with us, but apparently you were watching us the whole time. And Jesus is like, yes, exactly. Because one day, see, I will no longer be with you, but I want you to understand, I will still be watching you. And just as you didn't need to be afraid when I was asleep in the boat last time, just as you didn't need to be afraid when I wasn't with you in the boat. You don't need to be afraid, and this is his point. You don't need to be afraid even when there's something to be afraid of. So here's the point of this very memorable teaching for the disciples. It could be summarized this way. You don't have to be afraid even when there is something to be afraid of. You don't have to be afraid even when there is something to be afraid of. Guys, this is what Jesus repeatedly taught his apprentices. He taught it again and again and again. And here's something that I just find super encouraging. His disciples failed again and again and again to get this and to live this. Like right up to the very end, they struggled with this. And you guys know this, you remember this. Jesus is arrested, and what do they all do? What do? They scatter, they run away. I mean, do they courageously stand by him and go, no, we're not afraid of the things that can only hurt our body. Go ahead, pierce me with your sword. No, they're like, they run away. They're terrified, and they all run away. In fact, Peter, we're told, denied that he even knew Jesus 3 times, right? They did not fear the one that could only harm the body. They were terrified of the ones that could only harm their bodies. Despite all the miracles and all the teaching and all of their experiences up to this point, when Jesus was arrested, in all that pressure, in all of that confusion, it felt totally out of control, and they all ran away in fear. And now Peter's response is the most documented, to which he's probably like, come on, guys, really? You want to write yourself in the story a little bit? But they all ran away terrified. And I want to pause here and just think about that day. I want us to think about the arrest of Jesus for a minute and all that followed. Because what happened next is the foundation of our faith. And what happened next is what ultimately formed the disciples. It wasn't until this thing happened that they got it. Jesus taught on fear and uncertainty again and again, and they couldn't get it. But what happens next is what enabled his guys to finally get it. What happens next is what put all of Jesus' teaching into a new context for them. And it's what happened next that helped them get everything. It helped them understand everything. Here's what happened. Jesus was betrayed by one of his closest friends. As we know, he was unjustly arrested in the middle of the night. He was illegally tried and convicted. And then he was flogged. Now, we tend to kind of read that and go, next. But I don't think Jesus went, next when he heard that he needed to be flogged. So let's pause on that for a second. Here's how it's explained in the first century document from the author Mark. He says, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged. Now, without giving you like an overkill on gore, which I could do, let's ponder that just for a second. A skilled Roman centurion, okay, a skilled Roman soldier, because flogging someone was considered a skill. You wanted to bring a person to the very brink of death without killing them. So the centurion would take a whip with leather straps about 6 to 8 feet long, and tied into the leather straps were bits of glass and steel and stone. And the goal of flogging someone was to slowly rip the skin off of a person's back and chest and legs, one lash at a time. And this is what Pilate had done to Jesus in order to, we're told, satisfy the crowd. This is what the crowd wanted. After he was flogged, he was then taken by the Roman soldiers. And there the soldiers decided to have some fun with Jesus. I mean, it's kind of a boring day. We might as well have some fun with this guy. It says, then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. There's a lot of soldiers around Jesus. And it says, they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Imagine what that felt like on his mutilated body. And then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand, and they knelt in front of him, and they mocked him. Hail, hail, the King of the Jews, they said, again and again. They spit on him, they took the staff, and they struck him on the head again and again. Now, Pilate had hoped that the flogging would be enough to satisfy the crowds. He had hoped that it would be enough. It was not. After Jesus was flogged, he was presented again to the crowds, and the crowd, stirred up by the religious leaders, yelled to Pilate, what? What did they yell? Crucify him. It's not enough. Crucify him. And so Pilate reluctantly gave the order, crucifixion. Now, the Romans loved to use crucifixion, not just to execute someone. Romans love to use crucifixion to send a message, to instill fear. This is what happens if you become an enemy of Rome. Crucifixion wasn't just about killing someone. They could have done that much easier ways. It was about killing someone slowly. It was intended to be a grisly way to die. But the goal of it wasn't just prolonged pain. It was also about shame and humiliation. Now, in a lot of Christian art, usually the crosses are depicted as being way up there, kind of way off the ground, way up high. But in historical reality, usually, crosses were only about 6 inches above the ground. That way, while people were being crucified, the perpetrators and those, the people all around, the crowd all around, could walk right up to them and mock them right in their face. They could get in their face and mock them all the way to the point of their death. I mean, just a grisly, grisly experience. So check it out. It says, Matthew chapter 27, verse 39, it says, those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their fists and saying, come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. And they just mocked and mocked and mocked. And here's the craziest thing about all of this. Jesus walked intentionally right into it. He told his disciples it was going to happen. He predicted it, and then he walked right into Jerusalem and allowed it to happen. And here's something else that was crazy. When Jesus died, the movement of Jesus, it should have died with him. Just like as soon as Jesus died, as soon as he was getting crucified, should have just been like, that's it. The whole thing is off. It's over. Because he's not the king that we hoped he would be. And clearly he is not the Messiah. But what happened after Jesus died, just historically, is that the movement of Jesus exploded. It exploded in Jerusalem and soon all throughout the Roman Empire. And history tells us that the followers of Jesus, many of them became fearless. It's like somehow they finally got it. something changed it all. And here's what it was that made all the difference. It was not another lesson. It was not another miracle. It was not another crazy experience on a boat in a raging storm. It was not another campfire talk. It was this. It was that 3 days later, they saw their resurrected Savior alive. And once Jesus rose from the dead, they became fearless. Why? Because the ultimate enemy, death, had been defeated. Just weeks after the crucifixion, at the risk of his own life, Peter stood in those same streets of Jerusalem where he had just denied Jesus a few weeks before, and he proclaimed Jesus to the masses. Peter would never, ever deny Jesus again, and neither would any of the rest of the disciples. What we see as historical reality is this, and I find it staggering. The disciples would give their lives telling the world about Jesus. They told the world about Jesus until it literally killed them. Peter would be crucified under the Roman Emperor Nero, just historical fact. And there's historical evidence that Peter, at the time of his death, made an odd request. He didn't feel worthy to die the same death as his Lord and his master. So he requested that they crucify him. Does anybody know? How? Upside down. And you think about the transformation in Peter. How does that happen? Think about the courage. What in the world enabled him to live and die like that? It's like suddenly the words of Jesus made sense to him. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Once Peter saw Jesus raised to life, it changed everything. And Peter began to live with courage and hope and faith. He lived like a foreigner in this world that's just passing through. He lived like heaven is real and it's forever, and this life is really, really short. And he taught many, many others to live with that same hope and that same strength and that same courage. One of the people that Peter and the other guys taught was a man named Paul. And it's interesting, I actually had a very different plan for how I was going to end this message. And then last night I was sleeping and thinking and sleeping and sleeping and thinking. Do you know what I mean? Does that ever happen to you? Like, yes, there's a lot of nods. There's many nods in the room, like 6. Yeah, it's like 100% affirmation. But you're sleeping, right? And then periodically you wake for a sec, and then you kind of drift back into a sleep state, but you're still kind of thinking. So this is what happened to me last night. And it was super weird. And it was just sort of a weird sleep space. And somehow last night, I started thinking about the story of Paul. And some of you guys are like, man, I have always wondered what it is that pastors dream about at night. And I just want you to know this is what we do. We dream about scripture all through the night, every night, and biblical characters. No, that's okay. That's not normal for me. But last night, I had a dream about the Apostle Paul. Paul was a disciple of the disciples. I mean, that's how it worked. He was not one of the original 12. He didn't follow Jesus and walk with Jesus. He was a disciple that was made by the disciples. He was trained and he was apprenticed by Peter and John and Andrew and several of the other guys, and then some guys that they had discipled, guys like Barnabas. But in many ways, Paul went on, and this is what's interesting, he went on to be the most influential of any of them. He was one of the first to actually recognize that this good news of Jesus, the gospel, the good news of Jesus, wasn't just for Jewish people. It was actually for all people. So Paul started going from city to city to city, all around the Mediterranean and the Roman Empire and the areas of Greece, starting churches, telling people about Jesus and inviting them into life with Jesus, apprenticing under Jesus, just like he was. And he would gather them together and he would put them together in these house churches. And then he would teach them how to live in community together. Paul took the story of Jesus outside of Jerusalem. He took it outside of Israel. He took it to the Romans and the Greeks and people that worshiped Zeus and Poseidon and all of Athena, all that kind of stuff. And it seemed like everywhere Paul went, people came to Jesus. They also got very angry with him, but some of them came to Jesus. And then he would organize them into these house churches. And Paul had incredible influence. He became a powerful servant of Jesus. But I was thinking last night about what happened, this is probably 3 a.m. or so, about what happened in his life, that eventually Paul was arrested for telling people about Jesus. And he stayed in chains because he refused to stop telling people about Jesus. And then when he was in chains, he would talk to other prisoners, and he would talk to the prison guards, and he would talk to the officials that would come through the prison. He would talk to anybody that he had contact with, and he would talk to them about Jesus. And he was very, very effective in this, even as a prisoner. And all around him, people came to put their faith in Jesus. So last night, I'm dreaming about Paul, and I started to think to myself, man, imagine how much more he could have done if he just hadn't been arrested. I mean, he spent years as a prisoner and then he was executed. And so, imagine if he just hadn't been arrested. Imagine if he'd been able to go where he wanted and he'd been able to do what he wanted. How much more could he have done? How many more people could he have impacted? And then in the middle of the night, something else occurred to me. Well, you know what? If Paul had been able to go everywhere he wanted to go and do everything he wanted to do, maybe his influence would have actually been hindered. I mean, it's because he couldn't see the people he wanted to see and had to write to them. So instead of talking to them face to face, the only way that he could get his message to them was to write it to them. And so he wrote letter after letter after letter after letter, and those letters have now been used for 2,000 years to help apprentices of Jesus all over the world, in places like North America that they didn't even know about, understand what Jesus did on our behalf and how we too can enter into the life of Jesus now. Had Paul been able to see everyone that he wanted to see and do everything that he wanted to do in a face-to-face fashion, we probably wouldn't have any of his thoughts in writing. I don't know if Paul ever wrestled with confusion about his circumstances. Like, why, God? Am I not killing the game for you and what you've asked me to do? Why would you allow me to be arrested? What the heck is going on? And when you think about it, Paul didn't know if he was soon to be released from prison or if he was soon to be executed. He just didn't know. His circumstances were entirely uncertain. But what Paul did was let go completely of trying to control and manage his circumstances. And instead, it was like he simply said, okay, well, I wouldn't have drawn it up this way. I'm not glad that I'm in prison. This is not how I would have drawn it up, but I can't control any of it. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm just going to go free in a few days or if I'm going to be executed in a few days. I don't know if I'm going to live in prison for 10 years or 20 years or what's going to happen. But here's what I know. I know this. Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. And I know that he's called me to go and to tell the world about him. And I'm going to use whatever means is at my disposal to do that in the best way that I can. And so, because of his circumstances, he switched from face-to-face communication to doing a ton of writing. And you guys, God blessed it. Man, did God bless it. God used his writings even more than he used his preaching. God was with him in prison. God was at work, and God was not done. And because Paul didn't let uncertainty paralyze him, God used that time to make Paul more influential than ever. So last night, I was dreaming about that and thinking all about that. And today, I've been reflecting on it more and more because some certain dreams stick with you, right? Am I right? And I'm glad it did, because otherwise I would have had no sermon. But today, as I've been reflecting on all of that, it occurred to me that maybe we could say it this way. It occurred to me that Paul was, in a sense, in quarantine. Right? Paul was mostly cut off from social interaction, other than a few visitors and a few people that came to be with him, and they allowed some of that. Paul was, in a sense, he was sheltering at home. Lots of his prison time, and this is kind of interesting, a lot of his prison time, especially toward the end, was on house arrest. He was literally locked into his house, and some of you can relate. And yet, God blessed that time, and he continued to focus on his mission. In fact, arguably, God made that time the most fruitful time of his entire life. Paul was living under unimaginable uncertainty, but he learned from the guys that had learned from Jesus that while uncertainty is unavoidable, fear is optional. And instead of allowing fear to paralyze him, Paul figured out new ways to continue in his mission. He trusted that while his own plans had been put on hold, God's plans for his life could never be put on hold. No external circumstance could stop God from moving in his life and moving through his life. And so what I want to do is just kind of bring this whole thing full circle back to you and me. And this is a crazy time. I cannot remember anything like it. Like, is anyone else missing sports the way that I am? My God, man, it's crazy. Okay, yeah, no March Madness, no NCAA tournament, no NBA, no spring training, no opening day for baseball to look for. Guys, there isn't even golf. I would settle for being able to watch some golf right now. This is a crazy time for far bigger reasons than that there are no sports. And I don't want to run through a long list. Okay, you know what that is for you. But it's different, and it's challenging, and it's an interruption, and it is uncertain. There's so much right now that is totally unpredictable. But I just want to close by reminding all of us of some really important things. Just because my plans are on hold doesn't mean that God's plans are. He may be up to something beautiful that I know absolutely nothing about. His mission for me and his mission for you, it has not changed. He wants us to love and serve people well. He wants us to grow, to look more and more and more like his son, Jesus. He wants us to see what he sees when he looks at the world and to feel what he feels when he looks at the world. And no circumstance can stop any of that from happening. Paul couldn't do what he really wanted to do. He couldn't meet with the people he wanted to face. He couldn't help people come to understand the way of Jesus and live it, at least not by telling them about it and living it with them. He couldn't do it the way that he wanted, and so he took to writing. My closing question for you is, what does God want you to take to right now? If you can't do what you really want to do, what can you do? What opportunities are actually there right in front of you right now? What if God is up to something bigger than you can possibly know? What if there's nothing to fear in all of this because God's got this? What if there's nothing to fear for you because God's got you? What if all of this craziness, this like crazy uncertainty for you, what if all of this is just crazy uncertainty for you, but it's not for God? What if he's got you, and what if he has always had you? And you're about to discover for the first time how true that really is. I just want to reiterate as Jen said earlier, I'm going to lead an online discussion about some of these topics and how they relate to us personally and what's going on with us. And as Jen said in the announcements, Thursday nights, I'm going to do it for an hour from 7 to 8 o'clock online. It'll be interactive through Zoom, so this discussion group. And if you're interested in joining a few other people in talking through some of this stuff together, then please mark your online communication card. Here's what I will say. It is a wonderful time to innovate, my friends. Who knows what God will do if we continue to pursue the mission and take advantage of the opportunities that are actually the ones in front of us. Amen.